Welcome to A Lunch with Biggie, a podcast about small business and creatives sharing their stories and inspiring you. My guest today is a cartoonist illustrator who is a mafia nut and an avid consumer of mafia trivia, as well as a ponderer of what dust bunnies do all day. Yes, the dust particles that you usually see lurking under the bed. Please welcome the creator and illustrator of the Dust Bunny Mafia, Bret Juliano. What's going on, Bret?
Hey, Biggie. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome, man. Very welcome. So tell me, automatically, first question, what's your go-to lunch, favorite sandwich? What you got? What are you ordering?
My all-time favorite is barbecue. So whether it's a brisket sandwich or a pulled pork, pretty much if they have barbecue on the menu, I'm ordering it.
Okay.
Which, I'm gonna ask you,
I know.
where's the barbecue love?
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I've actually been doodling. The idea that I originally told you I've already doodled it. I will be honest with you, the problem I'm having with that one is there's a particular artist that I really wanted to do it, and he keeps telling me yes, and it just hasn't happened. And so I'm kind of like, I'm about to turn and kind of just go somewhere else and just say, okay, well, this is where it went. Or I may go with a different idea, but I have an idea and I just haven't pulled it off. It's something sports related. But I kind of laugh every time I think of it. And I think we and I have talked about it, but yeah, I promise you it will happen. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen in this year, because I have a lot of ideas that I want to get done and I just haven't pulled the trigger on it. So let's kind of give, and I was trying to remember when I was doing my research and everything. I know you live in Illinois. I believe we met because of social media. How did we meet? I know we've hung out in real life at least twice. Once in happiest place on earth. We went to Epcot and hung out at Epcot. I know we then met up and had some sandwiches at a local place as well. But how did we end up meeting up on each other, introducing ourselves to each other?
Yeah, it was actually through Lane Lee, who was, your original,
Yeah.
one of your original designers.
Yep.
So I worked for a greeting card company in California that Lane also he was working full time with, and he actually was one that actually gave me a lot of help when I was starting out illustrating.
Yeah.
And so he gave me a lot of tips. And while we were both at this other job, he was producing he was doing his side hustle.
Yeah.
And I was telling him about my ideas. And yeah. And then he's like, as we were talking, throughout that summer and stuff, he was like, by the way, I'm working on this cool, sandwich related clothing brand. You got to check it out. And
that's crazy. I don't know why. I totally forgot about that. That is amazing. And definitely small world. That's awesome. So, okay. So let's talk about Dust Bunny Mafias. So tell people about the comic. Right off the bat, I'm intrigued by it because I've always been intrigued by it, but, if I'm correct from what I've read, you've done over 600 comics or little strips and stuff like that about them. You've done mini collections, you've done, different storylines and everything, all using Dust Bunny Mafia. So tell people what it is, what's Dust Bunny Mafia, and how the heck you came up with the idea of creating something based out of dust bunnies.
All right. Yeah. So Dust Bunny Mafia is like Looney Tunes meets The Godfather. So it's an all ages newspaper style comic strip that's got a bunch of mafia families, rats, crows, dust bunnies, trying to take over the city and avoid the cops. And yeah, I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And the idea originally came to me while I was sitting in traffic in LA. I was working my day job. I had just graduated college. I got a job and, was like, I wanted to do something with illustration. I'd always been doodling, but never actually went down that path. So I was sitting in traffic and I saw DBM on a license plate, and I had a 2-hour commute on my, looking ahead of me. And I'm like, what could DBM stand for? I played the acronym game and I just thought Dust Bunny Mafia. And I'm like, I'm writing that down. And by the time I had gotten home, I had kind of conceptualized the first 6 Dust Bunny characters, and then I have a background in illustration. I've done graphic design. I've been doodling for years, and I just had all the ability to make a website for it. So I'm like, I've got the tools, I have the knowledge, nothing's stopping me. So might as well just start writing a comic with it, and then kind of just spun out from there.
That's insane. And it's funny because I'm noticing a theme on where people get, and you can tell me, do you get a lot of creative ideas when you were stuck in traffic, like when you're driving in that kind of like the whole hum of like traffic and driving? The other one I noticed that a lot of people get, which I get as well, is in the shower. They a lot of people tend to get like the crazy ideas come into them when they're showering. So it's that is really cool. I did not know that. I was trying to figure out what it was that led to it. And that's amazing that you kind of did it that way. I'm also amazed that you've been doing it for over 10 years. I mean, that's a long time doing it. How have you battled in those 10 years, battled either doubt on like, what the hell am I doing? Or B, the aspect of like the creative blocks. Even though we've been talking about creativity, but like, how do you battle those? How have you battled both of those? Because during that long, there's a long period of time, I'm assuming you've kind of battled the ebbs and flows of being a creator and an illustrator, and having something that you're actually trying to build.
Yeah. So um, for the first part, one of the big things that definitely came with mine in particular, my illustration style, is I use Illustrator, and I'm a digital artist. So I sketch a lot of stuff out. I, rough hand in my sketchbook, but most of my comics are, digitally done. And with the program that I have all these assets and libraries full of old material. So I can pick up pieces from comics from 10 years ago or 5 years ago and grab a scene and drop it into the panel without having to redraw everything. And that was actually a big frustration, or kind of almost imposter syndrome for me
Mm-hmm.
for a while, because I was in these artist groups and stuff, and I'm working and I'm seeing people drawing on their, tablets or doing stuff traditionally and having to redraw different panels and stuff. And I've always been doing this. My day job is a programmer, and one of the big aspects of programming code is reusability.
Yeah.
And so I took that aspect and applied it to my illustration style. And for the longest time, I dealt with the imposter syndrome of, I'm not as good, or I'm not like these other, I'm not a real artist per se, because I'm reusing
Yeah.
these assets that I have, as opposed to, doing everything the way it's been done um, traditionally, or what people would think of. Um, but it wasn't until a couple of years ago that someone was like, "You're doing it like, don't think of yourself comparing yourself to the way artists do it. Compare yourself to like movies or music and stuff, where they'll reuse assets. Like, you go to a
Yeah.
movie, if they've got props, they'll reuse them. Like,
Well,
and
same thing
so
with
that
animation
actually,
studios. I'm pretty sure animation studios use a lot of that type of stuff as well, when they can reuse certain backgrounds and certain things when they do that as well. First thing I think of is like Simpsons or something like that. I could totally see that being something that is done that way. So yeah, that's kind of a tough one. What about the creative blocks? Like, do you basically just go back, and when you have those moments, do you kind of go back and start doing, because one thing that you do quite a bit of, kind of like how I do sandwich history or sandwich fact type stuff, you do quite a bit of, a lot of the characters are inspired by real mafia members. So like, do you do a lot of that when you got like a creative block, like maybe kind of see research, maybe there's someone you don't know, or maybe kind of go back to some books, mafia or mob boss type stuff that inspires you?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you hit exactly on the head is if I don't have something in particular, if I'm working on a news story and I don't know what to do with it, I'll try and do some research on, you know, mob bosses that had this situation or, different things. Otherwise, I've got a whole, as you mentioned, library of true crime material, whether it's actual books, whether it's podcasts that I listen to, things like that, that I'll just be like, okay, I need to take a break from this. And it's oftentimes like I know my limit and I know where I'm not going to be creative at that point.
Yeah.
And you know, been doing this long enough that's like, okay, I'm not going to make any progress on this. So let me just set it down and let me go work on something else. Whether it is, diving into one of those things, whether it's popping out on a Netflix documentary, you know, the biggest thing for me for writers or artist block is to get away from it and actually just go focus on something else.
Yeah, I think that's always the tough part when you want to like kind of you want to break the block and you're like not sure how, and sometimes that's what you got to do. It's just you just got to walk away. So I definitely get that. So one thing that I've always been amazed by is during all these years, one of the things that I've noticed that whenever you have a big project, you end up doing a Kickstarter. You have like successfully funded like 7 Kickstarters that have led to like creating of like all different projects, but I've seen everything from like t-shirts have been done, pins, trading cards, playing cards. I've seen like the mini collections of like the true stories of mobs, stories and things like that. So tell me a little bit, or maybe give some insight on how you've been able to build one, obviously through time, build a community, but how you've been able to, help others if they're thinking of doing a Kickstarter. How have you been able to help, maybe get those things funded? Are there things that tips or tricks or things that you've learned along the way that you say, hey, these are things that are very helpful when if you're trying to come up with a product or do something like this? Because I always find Kickstarters to be kind of a little intimidating, but I'm kind of curious because you've done some really cool stuff with everything. Like one of them I believe is a poker chip. You've done quite a bit of different projects, so I'm kind of curious a little bit about getting a little bit of that from you.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, back in 2019, I did my first Kickstarter, and that was after kind of sitting on the sidelines for a while. Kickstarter, has been pretty active since probably 2016, 2017 is kind of when it really started to take off. And I had just kind of there's a wealth of resources out there for Kickstarters and Indiegogo, all that kind of crowdfunding. So like I actually joined a comic community it was a paid course called Comics Launch that was actually helping artists and writers that were creating comics crowdfund on Kickstarter. And so I joined that course after listening to a podcast. The podcast was completely free, and the creator of the course has done to date like over 300 episodes of just like tips, and he brings on all these different resources, different people who've crowdfunded, hundreds of thousands of dollars on campaigns.
Yeah.
And so that was my way. I started listening to a podcast. I, as I tend to dive deep when I'm looking into something.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to research the heck out of it, which I know you do too.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing. I was like, all right, I've been doing the comics for, at that point, almost 7 years. I had self-published my first book, but I really wanted to take it further. I didn't want to, I wanted to kind of offset some of the costs. I'd seen people be successful on Kickstarter, even indie creators, and I'm like, let's try and do a small goal, do a first like mini collection where I was doing this based on a true story. Let's see if people like it. And the first one I ran like a 3-week campaign. It overfunded by a couple $100s, and I was like, okay. And it turns out, the brand I had been building, the people had been kind of watching, following my comics on social media, things like that. And of course, some friends and family, but like those were the people that showed up. It was the
Yeah.
people that had been interacting, commenting that I didn't really even know per se. And then yes, now fast forward, almost 3 years later, and I've, ran 7 successful campaigns. Like you said, I've done everything from playing cards to mini collections to whiskey glasses. And um, yeah, one of the biggest things I will say if you're looking to get into uh, some kind of a crowdfunding campaign is watch and follow and support some of the creators and other projects as you're, looking into it. You got to put some skin in the game. And so one of the biggest things, red flags I see from new creators when they're launching their Kickstarters is you can see how many projects people back and how many they've created versus how many they've backed and supported. And the biggest red flag to me is someone who's backed like 2 or 3 projects or none and is launching a campaign for 10, 20, $30,000. And it's
Yeah.
like, if you're not in that community and you're not supporting, you're not watching and interacting with it, it sends a big red flag to someone like me being like, how do I know that you're actually going to, fulfill your promises?
Yeah.
And um, yeah, that's probably like my biggest key of advice. And I
That's
mean,
awesome.
for Kickstarter, you can do it. You can support someone for $1, you know, and it's as easy as getting the access to the back end, seeing how people are, fulfilling their campaigns, what kind of communication they're doing, how do they interact with their backers, and it's invaluable for a buck.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And it's, yeah, and you're right. Even a dollar goes a long way when you're trying to, obviously when you, especially if you're looking to get information. Do you do mailing lists as well? I know you have like a Facebook group for that, but do you do like you utilize at all mailing lists or anything like that? Like
Yeah,
newsletters and stuff like that? And then how have you built that through the times? Because I also know you do like conferences and conventions and things like that as well.
yeah. So I have pretty much had a mailing list since I launched my first book in 2016. So I've got an email mailing list. I call it my Mafia family. And you can go on my website and join the Mafia family and get a free PDF of the first mini collection based on a true story. Super easy to get involved there. I pretty much use that kind of as a sneak peek, and it's kind of my insiders list. So that's the people on that group or in that email list get the first access to when I do new Kickstarters, when I'm announcing new shows and conventions that I'm going to be at. Um, and actually, that was one of the biggest things that I used for Kickstarter is when I was first launching. Um, in that podcast, they were telling you to get your first 100 subscribers before you launch an email camp or launch a Kickstarter campaign, because those are people who have opted in and have chosen to follow you and actually engage with you, and they've given something up. They've given their email, and they've given you the permission to market to them. And so, and that's actually one of the biggest other than previous backers on my Kickstarter campaigns, my email list is probably my number 2 uh, source of referrals and conversions when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, I think we tend to forget that. I think we tend to forget the power of our newsletter. And I find it interesting because sometimes I don't want to be and it's funny because sometimes I've talked to some previous guests that have told me, I said, yeah, I'm like, I don't utilize my newsletter probably as much. I try to do it when I have new products more than anything else, but sometimes I'm being told, hey, you need to do it more. And it's kind of, more than you even think, egos, because people want to see it, as long as you're providing some form of content or some form of information, not just telling them, hey, I got a new product. So that's something that I thought was interesting, because I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's like another form of content that you're able to kind of share with your customers. So yeah, that's something that's really interesting. And I always thought that was an interesting thing. When you do So you do a lot of different, you've done a lot of different conferences and stuff like that. What kind of conferences do you kind of like go like lean towards? Because obviously I would think you would be more in the comic world, like the you know, like kind of like a MegaCon, Comic-Con, but I also could see like if you have, and I don't know if you've ever done it, like an Italian festival, like one of those like Italian like you know, Italian type of, you know, I don't know, like Italian heritage festival. I don't know how if you have and how it's been taken, but like what kind of conferences are because you've, I know you've done different ones, like not just, you've not done, you're in Illinois, so you've not just done in Chicago, you've done other places. So like tell me a little bit about that, like how you've gone through that process of taking that step, because I've been told by some people, hey, I should sell my stuff at MegaCon, which is like an or a Comic Con in Orlando, and I'm kind of hesitant. So I'm always intrigued by people who would like take that big step, because it's obviously a big monetary step. But I'm also kind of curious on how people react to it and how you've kind of come up with like, hey, these are the ones I want to do or I'm willing to take a part of.
Yeah. By the way, I definitely think you should consider it for, especially with all your pop culture references and
Yep.
everything. I think that that would be an easy, a different avenue than
Yeah.
like the pop-ups that you do.
I'm thinking
But yeah,
2023. I don't think I can do it this year because this year's in May, but I definitely think I need to plan like ahead, because it's, from people that I've talked to, it is like massive, and it's definitely more than a me thing, but I've heard it's worth it, and it's 4 crazy exhausting days, but it definitely, you know, if you can be different, which I think that's one of the things that I think help it to your advantage, is if you're different than what everybody else is doing, you kind of stand out, because then it at least makes you stop and go, oh, what's that? Um,
yeah. Um, but yeah, to answer your question from my perspective,
yeah,
um, I mean, I've been attending conventions and stuff as a fan. Back when I lived in LA, I was going to Comic Cons and Designer Con, things like that, designer toy conventions for years. And then I'd been, working on my brand in the background or on the side, and I would go up and I would talk to, the people behind the table and stuff, and I would, bring like a bookmark with my one of my comics on it or a business card and stuff like that. But that was even before I actually had products. And yeah, as soon as I moved to Illinois and I finished my first book, I was like, okay, the next step from here, I had done a little Amazon launch, but it really wasn't much. I'm like, if I need, the best way for me to actually get these books sold and get people to know about it other than online is face to face. And so I don't have a storefront. I'm not big enough or well known enough to, even consider submitting to Barnes and Noble or something like that.
yeah,
And so I knew about these. I just did some research. I knew about some artist groups that were doing shows in the area. And actually, the first place I went and did a show was a library. And libraries have changed a lot since uh I was growing up, and where it was like very much you come, you get your books, you're quiet, you leave, like that's it. And nowadays, a lot of the libraries have really updated. They're trying to be almost community centers and for the family, and they're bringing in interactive, elements to it. Um, and they're really trying to get people to come, stay, utilize the community, and interact with, events. And so my first show was at a library where I was doing an artist alley, and I had, my proof copy of my book and some trading cards and some little things like that. Um, and then it just kind of spun from there. I got to, network with other artists, and I've done probably 2 or 3 dozen different library shows over the past, 3 or 4 years, outside of COVID. But, and then, I started doing some Comic Cons after that. Um, the hardest part for me actually was I didn't fit at Comic Con as much
hmm
because my comic is very literature based. You've got a lot of dialogue and wordplay. with it, as opposed to it's not a horror comic, it's not a superhero comic.
Yeah.
You actually have to think about it. And I mean, you've seen my display. I go all out, and I'm very themed with it. I've got, for the people that don't know, I've got, the 70s, 80s mobster look to it. I've got, leather briefcase showcasing some of my comics. I got the old dark hardwood for my different stands for different products. I reuse cigar boxes and things like that. And so I'm I try and give people an experience,
Yeah.
and it definitely will draw people in because they're like, this doesn't look like the DC and Marvel fan art that I'm used to seeing. And
Yeah.
um, but some of the biggest places that I've gotten the most traction is either I've done a couple of literary fests, so doing more of a book focused event, or I've done craft fairs, which would be unexpected because normally you have quilters or crochet artists or jewelry artists and things. You're not getting comic artists necessarily, and
Yeah.
that's something that's different. And yeah, some of my best shows post COVID were actually doing these craft fairs, and there's been some in Chicago that they've been doing pop-up shows at local breweries and things like that. And that's been my biggest pivot, is saying, okay, I don't really fit at Comic Cons, but I do better talking in a more relaxed, different atmosphere where you wouldn't expect a comic artist to show up.
Yeah.
And um, yeah,
Have you reached out to and the reason I ask is because like I know here in Central Florida we have a few like small local bookstores that aren't like the big like mom and pop kind of bookstores. Do you have those, and have you been to those in Illinois and maybe asked about possibly if they'd be interested in doing like a consignment version of your books or anything like that as like a local author type of thing? I'm just kind of brainstorming as I was thinking as you were talking. I was like, oh, I wonder if he's done that.
I've done it with a couple of local comic shops, but I haven't yet done it with the actual bookstores. I actually just went to a couple of local bookstores in my area and kind of scoped them out to see what they had.
Yeah.
But they were very much more, prose based when they had featuring their local authors or, Chicago based. And I was like, okay, this would not fit. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know that that's worth the risk, even
Yeah.
though, um, but I am exploring some different options.
It's good.
So
And I think that's one of the great things is that you're always kind of looking to see where kind of where else you can go and where else you can expand and kind of introduce the brand, your comic to them. One of the things your comics are all, if I remember correctly, your comics are on, you can also like, aren't they part of also like on a huge network of like isn't it like comics dot dustbunnymafia.com? Is that not the website? Are there other websites that are kind of like under that like they're all kind of a bunch of different type of comics all in there? So does that create like almost like a network of others, or is that how you created your domain for you?
that one particular is just mine. I
Okay.
mean, it is a subdomain of, so it's my Dust Bunny Mafia brand. I have some different, I have my other network when it comes to like my shop and my email list and things like that.
Yeah.
So I have those different network of sites, but I'm not connected to like a larger, you know, comic creating community in there. It's
Got
just
it. I was wondering, I was like, I wonder if there is something like that where you can like kind of read a bunch of like, kind of almost like a Instagram version of that where it's like different comics that people can go and look at and stuff like that. So I was kind of curious. Um, Brett, where did the fascination of mafia come from?
That's a great question. I've always been interested in like the secret societies and
Hmm.
things like that. Um, I remember being really young and uh, spending a lot of time playing this online encyclopedia game that was actually, booted on a CD-ROM and everything before even pre-internet. And I remember at one point stumbling on this article about a fedora, and that's kind of what kicked my fascination with the style. And I was, you know, read about, Humphrey Bogart and Frank Sinatra and people like that, and remembering, oh, that's the Rat Pack. That's what my parents are listening to.
Yeah.
And then, um, yeah, I've always, had this fascination with like the criminal mind. So whenever I watch shows and stuff, I've always been more interested in how the criminal mind was working
Hmm.
as opposed to like police procedural where they capture the guy. I'm like, oh, what are they going to do to try and outsmart the cops?
Yeah.
What are different things? And, playing on my Italian heritage, I, just kind of rolled with the mafia theme. And yeah,
That's it's interesting. I mean, hey, how many and obviously I see a bunch behind you, and I know that you collect a bunch of fedoras. Like, how many fedoras would you say you have?
about 20
Okay.
um, between the seasons. I've got my wool ones, and actually, I'm just waiting for the weather to warm up a little bit here in Chicago. Had a pretty unseasonably cold spring, and once it flips, starts getting the 70s and 80s, most of those wool ones will be replaced with my summer straws.
Yeah. No, totally get that. So you've created a pretty, I would say, a very niche brand. Can you share like maybe some of the family secrets on how you feel you've grown and built that fan base? And also at the same time, what advice would you give someone who's starting out to kind of maybe build their own, kind of family, their own family of followers, to be able to kind of maybe build their own brand?
Yeah. So the biggest things I would say to someone that wants to start something is you've got to maximize your time. You have to find the time. Um, Whether or not you've got, if you've got a day job, if you've got, you're raising kids, whatever's occupying your time, you have to find little bits and pieces throughout the day that you can dedicate, that's not necessarily completely focused time where you can be like, okay, I've got 3 hours blocked off that I can just work on this project. You have to find the 15 minutes. You have to find the lunch breaks where you're not having to be at your desk. You have to find, those times and just jot some ideas down. I mean, one of my biggest things is I used to commute on the train to work and I had about 40 solid minutes and um, both in the morning and evening. And some of the time I could actually pull out my laptop and I can illustrate. Other times it was standing room only. And so I had my, little notebook and I was jotting ideas or I was reading true crime to get ideas. And, you just got to find your time. Um, and then the second thing would be to, just get off the sidelines, find something small that you can do to kind of work your project and make it a reality. I did it with my first Kickstarter. I had an $800 goal. I raised just under $1,200, and it was something that was low risk. It, Kickstarter was an all or nothing platform, and I just said, if if this doesn't happen, no big deal. I'll try again. I'll refocus, retool, but you just gotta find some time and try and make something happen.
I love those. I think those are very and I think what that's the hardest part. I think we tend to look at it too big sometimes and it becomes overwhelming. But if you can kind of take it on and take it bit by bit, or is that in my world, obviously one small bite at a time, you definitely can, it definitely makes sense to kind of go that route. And I think sometimes even for someone like me, and I don't know if it happens to you, you can become a bit overwhelmed sometimes with some of these things. And then you kind of then you beat yourself up on it, and I think that's kind of always the tough part, because it's like that's kind of when you need to take that moment away and maybe take a walk or go do something. I had one of my guests say take a hot shower, and just kind of like try to get away from it, and separate yourself, because sometimes all those things kind of beat up and kind of go from there. So I definitely agree with that. I think that's great. Where can people follow? Can they follow you? and obviously subscribe, maybe subscribe and become part of the family, your mob family, your Dust Bunny Mafia family, and kind of support and check out Dust Bunny Mafia.
Yeah, so I'm on all the major platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Instagram's probably my number one most interactive platform. That's definitely where I promote when I'm doing shows and different cons and different things like that. I've been online for 10, 12 years with Dust Bunny Mafia. So a quick Google search, you can find it. And I mean, comics.dustbunnymafia.com is the main site for me. I've got all my links on there. You can, join the Mafia family to get on the email list. And then, I've also got an online store on there where I sell my comic collections and some of my shirts and things like that as well.
What I know you've done like plushes, which I love, and I know you've done like crochet versions of your guys, because I've actually done a crochet version of Biggie Bread thanks to you. Have you ever looked into, or have you looked into like 3D printed or vinyl versions of them? And you have one. You're about to show me, aren't you?
Yep. So
No way.
Yep.
We may
So
have to
I
talk.
just recently got I hand painted this one myself. But yeah, I looked up a vinyl printer. I didn't do it myself. I outsourced it. But yeah, I can definitely give you some info. And the plan is for my next Kickstarter campaign, when I do my next full length collection, is I've got some originals that
Yeah.
people can some blanks that people can do themselves.
Yeah,
And
that's
so I've got
awesome.
one character right now, and the plan is to do a whole line of them.
Very cool. And I've seen that you've done like trading cards for them, as well as also playing cards and the poker chips. I mean, everything is on brand, which is one of the things I love, is that you've stayed consistent through the process of things that would be, that you would expect. And that's one of the things that I think I enjoy the most, not to mention the fact that there are different types of mobs. So that's not just Dust Bunny. There's squirrels, there's birds, there's like, so many different ones. So I definitely appreciate I appreciate the creativity and being so different. I mean, those are the things that I love seeing, with people doing things like what you're doing right now. So thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. That's our show for today. Thank you so much to Bret Juliano for being on and having lunch with me. Make sure to check him out. Check out Dust Bunny Mafia online. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe. If you want to support, check out my brand, Deli Fresh Threads, and do some shopping and tell your friends. Thank you. Until next time, keep eating sandwiches and follow your passion.